was nighttime and we wanted to take photos of the moon, but we couldn't. They all came out blurry and ruined, so we just stayed to watch. Come down with me. Suddenly we heard something that seemed to come from the ravine, through the branches. We were kilometers away from any town, any house, and yet something, a voice, was speaking to us from down there. How is the community doing? I hope well. I like to imagine that by now, each of you has your own way of listening to stories at night. That some of you make your coffee before we begin. That others use the time to catch up on things while we keep you company. And I know there are those who wait until everything is quiet. Turn off the lights and put us on just before falling asleep. But whatever your ritual may be, thank you for letting us accompany you once again. And by the way, if something strange has ever happened to you while listening to this program, remember that, strange as it may sound, you can get holy water and make a cross on your TV, your computer, your phone, or whatever device you listen to us on. I know a lot of people won't believe in this, but it's something that was recommended to us for you. So if something has ever happened to you while listening, there's your solution. But for now, let's set that aside. We begin, and you are already listening to Tales of the Night. My name is Graciela, and what I'm about to tell you happened exactly 5 years ago, when my boyfriend and I had not been living together very long, around our first anniversary. I remember the date because of this. I'll start the way many people do, by telling you that I had never been someone who particularly believed in paranormal stories. I loved hearing them because I grew up in a town where there was always someone who claimed to have seen fireballs, witches, goblins, or some apparition on the road. But I always thought that if something similar ever happened to me, I would surely find a logical explanation, because I considered myself smarter than those who actually believed. What happened that night was the first time I understood that there are experiences you simply will not be able to explain, no matter how hard you try. To this day, this event continues to have a strong influence on my life. It was a before and after, and you'll understand why soon enough. One of my best friends had just finished building her little house in a neighboring town, about 40 minutes from ours. She had been working on it for years, little by little. First she bought the land, then she built a small room, and gradually they finished the other spaces one by one until she was finally able to complete it. We were all very excited to see it, since we had watched the whole process from when it was just a patch of dirt. She invited us to spend the afternoon there, eat together, and stay the night to properly christen the house. A sleepover, like when we were girls. I really did want to go, very much so. But the following day I had to be at work very early, and there was no way I could miss it. I told her I would spend a few hours with them and then have to head home. My boyfriend offered to come pick me up after dinner so I could stay a little later, and wouldn't have to drive home alone at night. In those days it was staying light out quite late. I remember perfectly that the sun had barely set just after 8, and there was still some light when he left our town. He arrived around 9 at night. He came in to say hello, and we said our goodbyes to my friends amid much teasing, because they all kept insisting I stay, promising they would wake me up early the next morning so I could get back to work in time. I kept saying I couldn't. We hugged, I got in the car, and my boyfriend and I set off on the way back. The road was very peaceful, really. Very little traffic in that area, especially at that hour. We barely crossed paths with a car every 10 minutes, and our conversation covered how wonderfully my friend's house had turned out, her plans for the garden, how good it had been to see her so happy after so many years of hard work. Between the two towns there was a very isolated stretch that I had always found beautiful during the day. It's several kilometers where there isn't a single house, no ranch, no shop, not one street lamp. Only hillsides covered in low brush and some very sharp curves. On one of those curves, the tightest one, there is a small widening in the road that serves as a natural lookout point. From there you can see a fairly deep ravine, and if the night is clear, the moonlight illuminates the entire landscape in an impressive, very beautiful way. When we passed that spot, we both looked over at the same time and nearly said the same thing. The moon was enormous, round and very bright, casting its light over the rocks and trees. It almost looked like daytime. It lit everything up so much. It hung so low it seemed like the hills were swallowing it whole. It looked enormous. My boyfriend slowed down and asked if I wanted to stop for a bit to take some photos. I saw no problem with it. It was still early, the weather was nice, and everything seemed completely calm. And although I told you it was a curve, it wasn't dangerous to stop there. There was plenty of room to pull the car over. He turned off the engine and we got out. The moment we closed the car doors, the silence struck us. It's strange how the noise of the engine keeps you from noticing everything else. When we turned it off, it felt as though the entire world had gone still. There was no wind, no insects, nothing to hear at all. Before us, the ravine opened up, covered in trees and bushes that descended until they disappeared into the darkness. The moon made it easy to make out the treetops, so I took out my phone to take a photo. The screen showed a completely blurry image. I tried again, then a third time. The result was always exactly the same, and I think we've all felt that frustration when trying to photograph the moon. My boyfriend tried too and had the exact same problem. We ended up laughing about it, saying we would have to figure out how to do it properly, that there must be a way. Because otherwise, how do all those moon photos we see get taken? We leaned against the metal guardrail of the lookout, the kind they put up so cars don't go over the edge, and simply stood there looking at the landscape. We didn't speak for several seconds. I even remember thinking that it was better to stand there and enjoy that moment than to keep trying to take photos that were never going to come out right, and that maybe we'd never get another chance like this. That was when we heard the voice for the first time. It was very faint, barely enough to make out a single word. We both lifted our heads at the same moment and looked around. The road was still completely empty. No car coming from either direction. No person, even less so. I thought maybe someone had stopped a few meters ahead, out of sight. But we waited a few seconds, and the voice was heard again, a little clearer this time. After a brief pause, the voice said, "Come down." My boyfriend asked me very quietly if I was hearing it too. I could barely answer him because the voice repeated exactly the same thing. It was a woman's voice, but it didn't sound desperate or like someone calling for help. It was inviting, like when someone calls another person over because they want to show them something. The strange thing was that the voice was clearly coming from the ravine. We both took just one small step toward the edge, trying to make out whoever was speaking. At first we saw nothing, only branches lit by the moon. Then something moved among the bushes. I thought it might be a deer or some wild animal. But then it began to approach, and little by little its shape became visible. Its human shape. First I saw the eyes, then slowly the face. It was a woman, or at least it appeared to be. I will never forget the way it moved. It came out of the branches and began climbing up the ravine, on all fours, but not crawling the way any person would. It seemed to propel itself almost entirely with its arms. It would press them against the rocks and launch itself forward with tremendous force, while its legs barely followed along. It was climbing up an extremely steep section. It was moving far too quickly for the steepness of the terrain. There were dry branches and large boulders that any person would have had to go around, but it simply went straight over everything without slowing down at all. As it got closer, I could make out that it had very long hair, tangled around its arms, and its head was raised, looking directly at us, even though the rest of its body was locked in that deeply unnatural position. Then, while we stood there in shock, it spoke again with the same calm as before. "Hey, come down." It was very close now. Telling this now, it might seem like we stood there for a long time, but we didn't. I want to make clear that all of this happened in about 2 or 3 seconds. I felt a fear so deep that, while I was watching it, I was unable to move. My mind was desperately trying to find an explanation before it would let me act. I told myself maybe it was a lost woman, someone with a mental illness, or even an elaborate prank. But none of those thoughts lasted more than a second or two, because all you had to do was watch it move to understand that what you were seeing was not normal in any way. No person can climb a slope like that, propelled almost entirely by their arms, much less do it at that speed and without showing the slightest effort. My boyfriend reacted before I did. He grabbed my arm with such force that the next day I could still see the marks of his hand. We ran to the car. I don't even remember opening the door. All I know is that in the next instant I was already sitting inside while he started the engine before I had even finished closing it. We pulled out of that place accelerating far more than was safe. The tires screeched against the pavement, and for several minutes neither of us could say a word. I kept looking constantly in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it appear behind us, though that was obviously just my fear telling me it was still back there. I saw nothing more, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, following us, dragging itself along. My boyfriend was breathing with difficulty. His hands were trembling on the steering wheel, and I could see his face was completely drained of color. A few kilometers later, he said he had a terrible headache. Then he mentioned that his chest felt very tight, and his heart was beating too fast. I got worried, because he had struggled with high blood pressure years before. Since one of his aunts lived in the next town, we decided to detour there so she could check on him before we continued home. His aunt opened the door, still surprised to see us arriving at that hour. The moment she saw his face, she went to get the blood pressure monitor. It was very high. She had him lie down, gave him water, and waited for him to gradually calm down. When he was finally able to speak calmly, we told her exactly what we had seen. I was convinced she was going to tell us about a local legend tied to that curve, that something had disappeared there, that there was some story about that ravine, something. But she told us the exact opposite. She said she had lived practically her entire life in that region, in that town, that she knew that road perfectly, and that she had never heard a single legend connected to that spot. No strange accidents, no apparitions, no women coming out of the hillside, no witches. Absolutely nothing. In the days that followed, we tried to convince ourselves it had been a person, nothing more. We went over the story again and again, looking for some detail that might let us make sense of it, but we always ended up stuck at the same point. What on earth was she doing there, in a ravine in the middle of nowhere? No person can move that way. No one can climb a ravine propelled almost entirely by their arms while calmly calling out to two strangers to come closer. Several years have passed since that night, and we still use that road at least once a week, almost always alone, either him or me. The difference, of course, is that we never stop now, and we never would, especially not after dark, and especially not at that curve. And you can't blame me. Not one of you would. After seeing what I saw. I'd rather not give my name because I still do this kind of work and there are people who know this story. Besides, if anyone from the town happened to hear it, they would surely know who I'm talking about, and I don't want that either. All I can say is that this happened 4 years ago, when I was traveling through several municipalities. Some nearby, some in neighboring states, making work visits. Back then, I spent more time on the road than in my own home. During that time, a coworker taught me a trick that he said everyone ended up doing sooner or later. The company gave us a stipend for hotel and meals whenever we traveled for several days. What he would do was stay with relatives, friends, or even acquaintances whenever he happened to know someone in the place he was going. That way he saved the hotel cost and got to keep the per diem. I remember he used to say, laughing, that this was the only real benefit that job had. Because otherwise it was just driving all day, hauling equipment, waking up early, and sleeping wherever you could. I had never tried it myself, because I almost always ended up in cities where I didn't know anyone. But one day, I was assigned to visit a small town, and while driving there, I thought of my godfather. We hadn't spoken in many years. Practically since my mother passed away, we had stopped seeing each other, even though he was my baptismal godfather. I didn't even know if he was still alive, but I figured I had nothing to lose by reaching out. I sent him a message explaining that I would be passing through that area, that I only needed a place to sleep for one night, and that if it was too much trouble, he shouldn't feel obligated. I was hoping that, if I was lucky, he might offer me a couch. That is, if he replied at all. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. He told me he was glad to hear from me, that there was absolutely no problem, and that he had a small vacant house where I could stay. His daughter's house, who had moved to another state some time ago and only came back once or twice a year. He explained that the house was simply kept closed to keep out dust, but that in that town nobody locked their doors. When you arrive, just push the door and walk right in, he wrote. He also gave me very simple directions, because according to him, everyone in that town knew each other, and anyone could tell me where the house was. I finished my work that afternoon and arrived in the town while there was still daylight. It was a much smaller place than I remembered. The streets were unpaved dirt, the blocks were very long, and between one house and the next there were lots full of mesquite, prickly pear cactus, and dry brush. At times you could walk entire blocks without seeing a single house or any occupied building. On the way in, I stopped to eat at a food stand in front of a large empty lot, bought a bottle of water for the night, and then followed my godfather's directions. As he had said, I found the house without any trouble. I pushed the door and it opened. Inside it was very clean. You could tell someone came by every so often to sweep and air it out. I sent him a message thanking him and letting him know everything was fine. He replied wishing me a good night and reminding me to just pull the door shut when I left. Since I had a lot of kilometers to cover the next day, I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. I wanted to leave at first light and make up some time on the road. I got my bag ready, put the car keys on a chair next to the bed and lay down. I was so tired I fell asleep almost immediately. What I remember most about that place is the silence. There were no dogs barking in the distance the way there are in every town. No televisions, no cars on the road, no music. The silence was so deep that it actually took me a while to fall asleep at first, because I was used to the noise of the city. I don't know how much time had passed, but I suddenly opened my eyes. I swear I heard laughter, a low chuckle, out there somewhere, like a man walking alone who remembers something that amused him. Then I heard someone begin to sing, a song I didn't recognize. He was humming it slowly, unhurried. I looked at my phone. It was already 3 in the morning. I thought maybe a neighbor had come home drunk. I got up, still half asleep, and walked to the window that faced the front yard. I pulled the curtain aside just slightly. There was a man standing inside the property, inside the yard. I remember exactly what he was wearing, because the moonlight was quite bright. He had on black trousers, a black jacket, very old, and a hat, a flat-brimmed hat. He was tall. He must have been close to 6'3", which seemed enormous to me since I barely clear 5'5". Very thin. His arms hung long at his sides. My first reaction was to think it was my godfather, but I immediately understood it wasn't. I hadn't seen him in years, but he was short and stocky and walked with a slight lean to one side because of a knee problem. This man was nothing like him. I felt a chill, a strong one. I tapped lightly on the glass to get his attention. He looked up at me and smiled. He gave a little wave, as if he had already known I was there. I asked him what he was looking for, but he didn't answer. He simply started walking toward the window without stopping smiling. I spoke to him again. I've been lent the house. I have permission to stay here. I thought maybe he was a relative or a neighbor who didn't know someone was going to sleep there and had come to check on things. But he kept coming closer. When he was nearly in front of the window, he slowly raised one hand, and with his index finger, made a calm, gentle motion. He was telling me to open it. He did it only once, like an invitation. I asked again what he needed, and once more he didn't say a word. Then he placed both hands on the window frame and began to push it, very slowly. I reacted on instinct, grabbed it, and pulled it firmly shut. He kept pulling from the other side. I could clearly see his hands on the glass trying to open it, but they were unhurried, calm, without any urgency. It was then that something occurred to me that worried me even more. The window had no latch. Neither did the door. It was simply wedged shut, and that was it. I held the window with both hands while he kept applying pressure from outside. It wasn't much, I want to be clear. Just enough to try to push it open. But then he suddenly stopped. He went completely still, as if he had just thought of something. Then he smiled again, turned on his heel, and began walking slowly toward the front door. That was when I remembered what my godfather had told me, that nobody in that town locks their doors. I felt my stomach drop. I ran through the house trying to get there before he did. When I grabbed the door handle, I confirmed what I already feared. No lock, no bolt, no chain, nothing. All I could do was hold the door shut from the inside. I had barely braced myself against it when I heard his footsteps stop right on the other side. He simply stood there, separated from me by nothing but that wooden door. I could hear my own breathing, quick and uneven. I noticed it all at once, how frightened I truly was. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he must be able to hear it too. I waited a few seconds, then a minute, then 5. There was nothing to hear. No footsteps, no breathing, not even the wind. But I didn't dare move either, and so I stayed there. I don't know for how long, holding a door that, if he had wanted to push it open with any real force, he probably could have opened without much difficulty. I never heard him leave. There were no footsteps retreating, no door closing somewhere in the distance, nothing to signal that he had gone, or that he had ever been there at all. Then, after a very long time, the sky began to lighten. Dawn came. When the first light of morning came through, I gathered the courage to open the door. The yard was completely empty. No footprints in the soft dirt. No marks. Nothing left behind. I left the house, pulled the door shut as I had been told, and went directly to find my godfather before heading back to the road. I asked him if any neighbor nearby might have come to check on the house, who had been walking around there. He shook his head. He said nobody would have bothered to come by. There were no neighbors close by. I told him everything. I expected him to say it was some local old man, or someone known for wandering around drunk at night. Something like that. But he said none of those things. He was quiet for a few seconds, and then he asked me just one question. I told him yes. He nodded slowly, and without explaining anything further, he said only this. Well, it's a good thing you didn't. He said nothing more. No explanation, no reason why. And I didn't ask. I thanked him, with something close to irony, for letting me stay there that night, and I left. I never reached out to him again. I don't know what's become of my godfather, but I don't think I'll be visiting him again. Rest well, community. Have a very good night.